Hi, Derek.
Hello.
We've talked a lot the recent days about, you've mentioned it's going to be hard to judge this team, but let me ask you then, how would you judge it up until the week of the trade deadline? So let's say through that Saturday game against Tampa before the two Ottawa. At that point, how would you judge the team?
Well, I think that's exactly why it's tough to judge the whole thing. Because if you were to ask me then, it would have been flying colors. We were in the playoffs. We had games in hand. We'd be talking about, I'd probably be spending my coach of the year bonus already on some trip somewhere. So I think that's unfair on that end. That's exactly my point of, it's hard. So at that point, awesome. Our guys were playing the right way. Villy was playing like a number one goalie in the league, a top 10, 15 goalie in the league. Our special teams were clicking. We were at obviously a pinnacle then, but I think that's a huge credit to the guys. I do feel in some ways it was probably a little overachievement for us. Probably not a true indicator of the entire season. And I'll piggyback on the reverse end. What happened here in the last 5-6 weeks certainly is not an indicator. Probably the reality is somewhere in between. So I would love just to go back to that date and call it a season, but it's 82 games in a season. There's a lot that goes into it, and right, wrong, or indifferent, unfortunately, we're probably exactly where we belong. And that's not playing on Monday or Tuesday.
What went so very wrong in those two Ottawa games?
Great question. I think they just imposed their game on us more than we did, our game. And I think in both situations they got up and they were able to try to play a physical game with us, and we didn't have much pushback at the time. And again, I think those were just two outliers. It just happened to be right before the deadline. I think we would have bounced back from that game, those games. I think a couple bounces in either one of those games might have been different also. Those, it's easy to point to those two games when the dam broke. I don't think that's the case. I really think Steve would have and should have done exactly what he did the deadline, no matter where we were at, because, those were real. I think we did the right thing at that time. It just stings in the present. So great question, extremely fair question with those two Ottawa games. But I do think this group, because they did it all year, would have bounced back from that.
Thank you.
Ansar Khan.
Yeah, hi, Derek. Just to generate more offense next season, is that going to be, are you going to have to tweak the scheme, the system a little bit, or is it mostly just about personnel and growth?
That's a great question, because it's not just about personnel and growth. Obviously, there's something to that. Obviously, we'd love a couple natural 50-goal scorers. I mean, even watching how special Boston was this year, even watching them back, I can't tell you how many games they'd be tied tight, and one of their star players ends up scoring his 47th or 48th or 49th. All of a sudden they win 3-1 and everyone's happy again. Obviously we probably lack that. I understand that. But even talking with our staff this morning, we had improved defensive play. We had improved special teams. Those are all underlying numbers anyone can see and read, but our offense did not improve. Overall number will, because of our improved power play. You add in the power play goals, but our bottom line 5-on-5 offense, I think, is 100% something we'll look back at as a staff, look for some areas we can improve. It's just like anything else in your game. When it's not performing, we'll look back on. So yes, there is a little personnel reality to that, but I think that's a cop-out. We'll certainly look to dive into that as a staff, and even if we return the exact personnel we have, we'll want to improve on that. So that's a legit question, Answer.
And also, just how do you feel about just this team's the grit and the abrasiveness and being hard to play against? Are you comfortable with that, or is that an area that needs to improve next season as well?
That's an area that needs to improve. And I think it can be learned within the group. I think you saw there's times that we had good pushback. There's times that we were more engaged, and it probably led to a better performance or even success that night. But there's times that we got pushed around. And I mean, Helene just asked about the Ottawa series there. That's a reality in those two games. We got pushed around without pushing back much in that situation. So I think it can be learned within the group. And again, I think it's today's NHL. You don't need to go fight 4 times. You don't need to fight after every whistle, but you do need to stick up for teammates and push back. And you saw this group at times this year. So yes, that's another area where we'll try to improve on, either within our group or obviously through free agency.
Thanks, Derek.
Max Boltman.
Derek, are those two things that you just talked about, the finding a way to find finishing an easy offense and kind of the pushback, are those the two biggest things for you going into next year? Yes.
Not surprised. Those are the first 2 questions. You guys see us all year. You're a knowledgeable group. You might as well have been in our coach's room this morning about 2 hours ago. Many areas we need to improve on. We will improve on. We want to improve on. But obviously, those are 2. If we could turn around quickly, yes, of course.
There are some people who kind of hear about needing more offense and think of offense and defense as a trade-off at 5-on-5. What's your philosophy there, and how can you improve the offense internally without sacrificing? The identity you came in was about defense.
100%. That's a great question because that's real. Can I sit here and say our improved defense led to a little bit of our lack of offense? I don't know, but there was probably times that we valued keeping out of our net much more than putting it in. And I think that's the step in the growth we needed to take. Could you combine both of those? I think there's something to that. But hopefully we've established a bit more of a defensive foundation. And you saw our guys, the way we competed, that we cared about keeping out of our nets, some of the things we did within our game. Obviously, I think we finished in top 10 giving up shots against, improved slot shots against. There's some really quality numbers that we did improve defensively. But that could have led to a little bit of the lack of offense. But I think where we are as a group and the step we need to take in our growth, taking care of that end of the ice was the top priority. And that's where we were this year.
Thanks.
Brad Galley.
Derek, I like what you said at the beginning about the Coach of the Year award and spending the bonus that was there. That buzz that was in the air in this great hockey city, Red Wings fans could feel it for a while there, and they could feel it for the first time in a while. What did that sense of excitement do for you as a head coach leading this group, and what can that do for you getting a taste of that and giving fans a taste of that going forward?
Well, I think it says something about the group, and that was real. We felt it ourselves. Even our guys have been in this room a long time, the Dylan Larkins of the world. This is a passionate fan base. They're waiting for this to get over the hump. When we showed signs of it, and it was exciting, I think the fan base on a whole, I think, appreciated the compete in this group, no matter what roster we fielded on any given night. So that's real. And I think that's something that you can build off. And I think that's something that makes this organization and fan base special. So getting a little bit of a taste of that, I think, was real for our guys. It's like anything else, any winning you do, any success you have, you get a taste of it, you just want more of it. And I'm hoping that's one of many things that can fuel us into next year.
it's tough to win in this league without, great play from elite players. Your best players on the roster, some of the best young guys this team has invested in with high draft picks. What did you make of the years and overall growth and progress of Dylan Larkin, Mo Sider, Lucas Raymond, and some of the other guys that you view as the top building blocks of this franchise?
I'm very happy with all of them. And, you just alluded to the core we keep talking about. And I know there was so much talk about what we lost at the deadline and what went out of our room. But again, I tried to preach around that time, and even of late, at the same time, we were still building this core. Jake Wallman, you can put in that group, made a huge step this year, was a great signing for us. Oli Mata was a great signing for us. And then those young guys took their natural growth. Do we need more of all those guys? Absolutely, 100%. But to me, that's exciting, and I'm excited to get this going next year because of those type of players you've mentioned.
Thanks, Derek.
Ted Colfin.
Hey, Derek, just going back to Lucas for a second, though. I mean, was it a little bit of a growing season for him? I mean, there was still some offensively. I mean, he still was prone to those up and down streaks, basically.
Yes, I still think there's growth for Lucas, and there's a little bit. I'm not going to call it regression, but I think there's going to be some bumps between your first 2 years in the NHL and the fact he's never seen the American Hockey League. He jumped right into the National Hockey League. I don't think people respect how hard that is. I just think it's going to just keep growing steadily. There's going to be bumps in the road. Even physically, he probably went through some bumps and bruises. He went through some sicknesses this year. It's just part of being a young kid in this league. So I think a huge off season is going to be important for Lucas. Improving in a lot of different areas is going to be a goal of his this offseason, like most of our players. But him, he's still so fresh and raw in his development. There's still a ton of growth for his ceiling, and this summer will be another step towards it.
Hey, there's a small sample size, but I mean, do you expect Edvinsson and maybe even Casper to be competing for jobs in training camp? I mean, long time before training camp, but do you think they'll be in the mix?
I hope so. And we're going to give them every opportunity to be in that mix. I think that's a natural part of it. I hope they get to the point where they're forcing us to put them on the team on day one. If they're ready, great. I think you've already got a feel for me. I love playing young guys. I have no problem playing young guys. I think that's the way the NHL is now. It's the reality of the NHL now. But at the same time, making sure we handle their development properly. So I hope those two put us in some really tough decisions come camp next year.
The last one, do you expect all your assistants to be back next season, or is it too early to tell, or what?
Absolutely. I know Steve will meet with them individually here the next few days, like he will all of our players, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I'm very happy with our staff. My first time as a head coach, I had a specific reason of hiring every single person with a need. And we're still growing as a staff, but they checked off a lot of boxes. You can judge us on a lot of ways, but when you see improved special teams, and again, that's the entire staff, but that's a huge credit to our assistants. Obviously, they man those, and I oversee everything, but they're the ones truly in the trenches on those. So I was happy, extremely happy with our staff. They helped me grow immensely. I think you'd get the same feedback from our guys, and hopefully we take a step as a group this off season and next year also.
Sounds good. Thanks for this, Derek. Thanks for the cooperation all season.
Yep. Thanks, Ed. You got it.
Sean Shapiro.
Hey, Derek, were there things when you look at this season that maybe you wanted to do that you weren't able to do, as far as just that from having been an assistant at Tampa that you were able to do before that you weren't able to come into Detroit that you couldn't do in year one that maybe you have to wait for year two to do, or anything like that?
Wow, that's a great question. And we were just in different spots where we were in Tampa. We were obviously try to get a step from going good to great and win a Stanley Cup. Here, we're still early in those. So obviously there's some things we weren't able to do personnel wise. I've reflected on a couple times. It's really nice. I probably didn't respect or have an appreciation for some of my guys in Tampa. I knew they were good players, but what kind of difference makers? I can't tell you how many times we didn't deserve to win a hockey game and Vasi won a game for us. So we didn't deserve to win a hockey game, and Point and Cooch made a play or two. So maybe in some situations, yes, but on the most part, I'm pretty happy with some of the growth of our team game. Is it good enough? No. Are we where we wanted to be? Absolutely not. But I think we're going to take some natural steps in our team game just because we're into our second year of our process. Alex Weston, our goalie coach, I know I referenced this earlier a couple of weeks ago, but he had a great line when we were talking as a staff, and it put it in perspective for me. Last year, day one of camp, we started on the goal line. I really do believe next year we're going to start on the 50-yard line, which is a positive with this core and this group going forward.
What about yourself? How do you, when you look at your first NHL head coaching season, I know you coached a game last night, but how do you evaluate yourself when you look at it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's hard to, I'll reflect a little bit more on it. I'll always try to grow. So yes, I'll need improvements with myself, with the staff, with some of our relationships. I think that's every coach that's growing. That's what they seek and want in the off season. So again, I probably reflect our group a little bit, some obvious highs, some disappointing lows. There's probably, I probably reflect similar to our group. Plenty of growth there. Any great coach grows immensely, and they have to have a growth mindset. I certainly do. And I'll tackle this off season like I have every off season of my entire career and look to get better.
And then last one for me, throughout the season, I know there's things where Steve is the manager and you're the coach, and that separation is important. When it goes to the off season and now you have a full off season, do you become involved in those discussions of we need to add here, or like where do you become involved now in that discussion in the off season when you're not dealing with players on the day to day?
Yeah, we're a team. There's no doubt about it. And Steve, says it all the time. We're in this together. And I'll have thoughts, opinions. He'll want my opinion, but I still think to be done correctly and for this to be done the right way and healthy, there still has to be that separation between manager and coach. He looks at the big picture and growing this team every single day of the year. I'm locked into the everyday and the now. So of course we'll be on the same page and we'll have needs, but it'll be him and his management group that ultimately make those decisions. I'm a coach. I want it all right now. I want 50 players and a $200 million salary cap, and that's not realistic. So Steve will be the manager and I'll be his coach.
Yeah. Thanks, Derek.
Kevin Allen.
Yeah, Derek, you saw a very raw Simon Edmondson in training camp, and then you got him after almost a full season in the AHL. What did you see in those last 9 games that gives you optimism in projecting, that next year you're going to give him every opportunity to make that team?
I saw growth, and just like you said, optimism. That's a credit to the Grand Rapids staff, Ben Simons and his staff. They did a good job with him, much more detailed, much more ready for an NHL game when he came back. And it's tough not to get excited with what we saw in those 9 games, the package. So again, he'll need to have a great off season. I think between what he did in American Hockey League and here, I certainly hope he's going to be pushing for a spot on the team. But I saw growth from when he left us to Grand Rapids to when we got him back, and hopefully he continues to grow this summer.
Have you allowed yourself to think about whether in the long run, you might see Edmondson and Sider together, or do you think of the idea of having one of those giants on each defensive pair?
Yeah, I haven't really looked about that. You do hope players with those type of tools and that type of upside, you hope they land in your top 4. And for us to keep growing as an organization, they need to be. Now, whether that's together, time will tell, but we certainly hope both establish himself in the top 4. And obviously, it's pretty safe to say Mo has established himself that with us right now.
And then finally, obviously you've mentioned your foundation pieces, but, obviously the younger players are also key to this rebuild. And I wondered what you thought of the seasons that Bergman and Veleno had, 2 younger players who are involved in all this.
Yeah, some positives for sure. And they took some steps, but they need more growth. I think I have no problem. Took a dip in their game towards the end of the year. Understandable for young players. We've asked a lot of those guys. Even after the deadline, their role even increased more. And there was even obvious dip in their production, but some of their 5-on-5 play. So I think it's natural for young players. I think it's valuable and important for them to get those type of minutes in games. Now it's on them. Again, very important off season. You would hope there was just some natural growth and progression in their game, and they'll be better for it once camp starts next year.
Thank you, Derek.
Jonathan Mills.
You mentioned the highs and lows of the season for this group. And when you look back on the year that was had, what impressed you most about the team's commitment to maintain focus while under some difficult circumstances like the injuries and the trade deadline?
I thought for pretty much our team game was fairly consistent. And what I mean by that is it was an outlier when we had a extremely poor defensive game. Yes, there's games we gave up 6 or 7 goals, but there's very few games where we were on our heels for an entire 60 minutes or we literally got outclassed. I think that's a credit to the guys. Obviously, we had that push, what Helene referenced to before the deadline and where we were standing. But even after the deadline, I know it's different and these teams have already established themselves as playoff teams, but beating Pittsburgh, beating Carolina, beating Boston, beating Toronto, all these teams within a 2-week span, it's a credit to our guys, but I think it was our team game that gave us that chance. Could we beat any of those teams in 7 games in a playoff right now? Probably not. I think that'd be unrealistic. But there was some growth in there, and I think we were fairly consistent with our team game. Not all the time, not exact, not where we wanted to be, but I certainly think something to build on.
Thanks, Newsy.
Bob Duff.
And Derek, injuries are certainly part of what you have to deal with during the year, but I mean, you really didn't have Fabry hardly at all this year. You didn't have Zadina really at all this year. Is there still a sense that you haven't seen what, when this team is firing on all cylinders as a fully loaded roster, what it's capable of?
Absolutely. 100%. Of course. Every team deals with injuries. We're no different. We probably were not as deep as some other teams that went through some injuries that could survive it. Everyone, again, it's so easy to reference back the type of players we lost at the deadline, but the one that really stung this group was Ras. Ras was a huge part of our team. He was part of our top 6. He was part of our penalty kill. That physical pushback that we talked about that we were missing in some games and some situations that Max referred to early on. He was a big part of it. We're excited to get a healthy Ras back also. So I think that's part of it. Hopefully in that ideal world, those guys come back and a bigger and better version of themselves. But we also understand that injuries will be a reality. Let's not forget, beginning of the year, we went through 5-6 of our top 8 forwards out of our lineup early on, and I thought we did a really good job of managing that. So, talk about some hope and optimism. Of course, about some of those injured players coming back in a good fashion next year, we feel can help.
Along those lines of hopefulness, it seems like in these exit interviews, we always talk about what the team needs to do to get better. But what did this team do this year that, I don't know if surprised you is the right word, but that delighted you and just makes you feel good about the future?
The push. I will give this group credit. I think I was very realistic with my expectations with this team. I did not have this team. I have no problem saying it now. And I would have never said this to this group all year. I didn't see this as a playoff team. Player for player, where our roster was stacked up against our division, stacked up against our Eastern Conference, I did not feel this was a playoff team. Now, it was my job to push them there and get them there. But, man, this group thought they could get there. And I think that's why you saw them there right before the deadline. And I think that surprised me as a group. I remember the leadership core came to me and we were flirting with 500, competitive, much improved in a lot of areas. And they're like, we're in a good spot. If we can go 9-3, these next 12 games, we'll be right there. And I'm like, absolutely, we're pushing. Back in my mind, I'm looking at the schedule and I'm like, I don't realistically see that happening. And sure enough, we were 8-2. There was that push we talked about before the deadline, and that came from the room. And I think that's a credit to this group. So there was a nice little push from this group that I think we can build off going forward. And there was a lot of belief in that room.
Thank you.
Art Regner.
Hi, Derek. I'm kind of curious about how valuable is it to have a player like Pius Suter for a team that is going to take that next step? A guy that seems to be, if he were a baseball player, I think he'd play all 9 positions except pitch. I mean, he seems to be that type of player. Can you comment about how he kind of, in a way, is an embodiment of what a hockey player should be?
Yeah, he filled a lot of quality holes for us, and that's certainly credit for him. A lot of it out of necessity, and a lot of it out of credit to him. So, I was asked this question about a week ago. Very useful player, and again, where he fits in going to the future, where he fits within this league, I don't know. That's the layer management coach, but obviously the way I used him down the stretch, I think speaks volumes of what he did for us. So we'll see where that goes going forward.
Was Villy hurt this year, or was it just the built up of games that he played that he sort of tailed off at the end?
I think it's a little bit of both. He was dealing with an lower body issue, hence him, missing almost 3 weeks to the season. I'm glad he was able to get back. But you saw the Villy after the 3 weeks he was unavailable, was nowhere near the Villy when he was peaking towards the middle of the season. So I think there was a little mental, physical fatigue there, plus maybe his lower body underlying issue there a little bit. But towards the end of the year there, he was healthy and available to us. Probably no different early in the year. And I just think he hit a little bit of a physical and mental wall. You could see it in his play. He was not the same player or goalie at the end of the year. So hopefully this will be a learning experience for him. Hopefully there'll be some growth in him, maybe take him a little beyond his threshold. I think all goalies that take that step into being a starter go through. We just went through it with him towards the end of the year here. And, he's going to be a tough player to judge because, his 4 shutouts, there's times he was flirting with a 9-10. There was times probably that first half of the year, he might have been our most valuable player, and he showed signs of being a legit number 1 in this year. So I want to be cautious about judging him on his play towards the end of the year because it obviously was not what it looked like in the beginning of the year.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So,
last question, Will Birchfield.
Hey, Derek, you joined a much different team in Tampa than the one you joined here. Obviously, that team was already ready to compete and contend for cups. What did you learn this season about the challenge of trying to build a team up from the bottom in the NHL?
Great question, because I think the reality is you got to have some patience with it. And it's hard for coaches sometimes to have patience with it and to be realistic. We're trying to win every single night, and that's not a cliche. That's real. And a lot goes into that. And no matter what the circumstances are, we're trying to win. But I also think you have to sit back and be realistic on the big picture. Understand that maybe there's some steps back for some forward with our growth. So I think I was fairly realistic with this group, but at the same time trying to push this group to get the most you can out of it. So it's a natural step. It's year one for me with this group. We're hoping to make that next step next year and have an improved team in all areas, and it'll hopefully improve us in the standings where we end up at this time next year.
Thanks, Derek. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back shortly with Steve.